Welcome back, everybody. It's World Autism Awareness Day, and we have with us in the studio Joanne Lara from Autism Works Now. We have with us on Skype Anita Lesko, and we have with us on the phone the fabulous, the wonderful Dr. Temple Grandin. First of all, Dr. Grandin, welcome back to Autism Live.
It's great to be here.
Thrilled to have you here, and Anita is here too. You guys have a book that is out today, written by Anita, but it's about you. It's Temple Grandin, the stories that I tell my friends. I got to start, Temple, with asking you, why did you choose Anita Lesko to write this book about you?
Well, I think we kind of just chose each other. Anita, thought of the idea of doing it, and one thing I really admired Anita for is the fact that came from a very poor background, and she started out working at a skating rink and at concession stands, and now is a very successful nurse anesthetist at the hospital. And she had kind of a work history, sort of like me, doing a lot of different kinds of odd jobs. I was painting signs when I first started. That's how I learned how to do freelance work, and then that morphed on into my my cattle work.
Well, and obviously the two of you share a similar sense of humor, because there's so many things in the book that are funny. How did you guys realize that because you guys laugh a lot on the phone, I hear?
Well, we just, got to talking about different things, and maybe, we just liked a lot of the same stuff. And one thing that really interested me was how some of our stuff on our work history was so similar. Anita and I both cleaned horse stalls as a teenager, and she cleaned horse stalls in order to get riding lessons. And when I was cleaning horse stalls and running a horse barn, I was learning how to work, which was really important.
Wow. And so, Anita, I want you to chime in here. This was a fabulous opportunity for you to get to spend time on the phone with Temple. I started asking you before, but I never really got to it. What's the one thing that you found out about Temple that you didn't know before?
Well, there's so many things. I'm going to think about that for a minute. I mean, there's so many things. I think some of her childhood things were the things that surprised me most, that she just was like every other kid doing fun kid things. And I used to envision her walking on the beach when she found the message in the bottle that she was very excited about, and she started writing messages and putting them in bottles and tossing them out into the ocean. I thought that was a really fun thing, just to hear her talking about her childhood days.
Well, I had, my elementary school childhood was really good, and we used to do a lot of stuff on the beach. I'd collect shells, and then we'd make mosaics out of them. Another childhood thing that my sister and I had rock collections when we were young. We used to smash rocks open and see what they looked like inside. But I was so happy when I got the message in the bottle, and then I started, throwing messages out there in bottles, and I would get about half of them back. I thought that was great fun.
It was a fascinating part of the book. I was saying to Anita before that there was one thing in particular that I was shocked by, and I don't know if it's okay for you to talk about it here on the show, but I was fascinated by the exchange that you had with B.F. Skinner.
Skinner. I knew you were going to say that.
So I can talk about that on the show. I was an undergraduate psychology major at the time, and I wrote to Skinner, and he invited me to his office. And it was like going into to see the god of psychology. And I go in, and there's an old professor there, and I had on a dress at that time, and he asked me if I could touch he could touch my legs. And I said, you may look at them, but you may not touch them. And that was the end of that. I remember another thing with him, and I did write about this in my book, Animals in Translation. I said, B.F. Skinner, we need to learn about the brain. He says, we don't need to learn about the brain. We have operant conditioning. Well, I never believed that. And then years later, when Skinner got a stroke, he realized that maybe he did have to look inside the box after all.
How's that for karma? I in this year of the woman and this year of the UN General, them saying that it's this year the focus is going to be on women and girls on the autism spectrum, but it's also been the year of Me Too. And to hear you talk about B.F. Skinner, I just have to say, I have to applaud you, Temple, for saying to him, no, you can look, but you cannot touch.
That's exactly what I told him.
Was he surprised?
Then I I talked to somebody just recently about it that worked with B.F. Skinner years ago, and they said, "Oh yeah, that's B.F. That's the kind of stuff he did."
Shocking. But what was his expression when you said that to him, Temple? Was he shocked that you said no?
It totally ended it. And then after that, we went and toured his rat lab, and we got to talking about research.
Well, I loved how you
I was kind of shocked that that the great BF did that.
and I loved how you talked about how it instantly you went up to that building thinking that you were going to see somebody larger than life, and it instantly changed him in your mind.
Oh, yeah, he had a giant plant, and that big vine that went all around his office, and he looked just like a regular professor. It was sort of like finding Oz behind the curtain.
There you go. I love that. And Anita, were you shocked to hear this story?
I'm never really shocked when I hear stories about men doing things like that. I found it actually very entertaining. But back then, in that day, geez, he was actually before his time to do something like that. But actually, I was very impressed. Had I been in the situation and the guy said that to me, I probably would have been sort of speechless. I love Temple's comeback. You may look at them, but you may not touch them. I thought that was really slick.
I love that.
Really calmly and quietly and very politely, because I was trained to always be polite.
Well, and you were polite, but you had that firm boundary. I was impressed. I want for all of our young women to hear that. I thought that that was absolutely.
And you know what? It ended it. Now, the situation where this stuff really gets to be a problem, I had a situation in one of my very early freelance jobs where there was a ranch foreman who wanted to have sex with me, and he was slapping me on the butt, and I pushed him off. And then, of course, he goes and tells the boss that the corrals that I designed for him did not work. See, the situation where you absolutely cannot deal with this is when it's a boss. B.F. Skinner was not my boss. He did not do my grades. Whereas the other guy was able to sabotage the project. You see, when it's a boss at work, that is a situation that just absolutely can be career-wrecking.
And so what did you do, Temple?
It was a real problem because he told the rancher, this guy was a foreman on the ranch, that the corrals didn't work. And I almost thought, well, I'm going to just have to give up designing corrals. But thank goodness that wonderful Jim, the contractor who had built the corrals, he was another really important inventor for me. He seeked me out to design corrals for him, and he, supported me and says, no, I want you to keep designing stuff for me, but that was a situation, you see, where it was a boss doing it to me on a job, and that was much more difficult to deal with than the B.F. Skinner thing. B.F. Skinner was not my boss.
Absolutely. Now, Jim figures pretty largely in the book. He's somebody that you knew for a long time and that really you collaborated with a lot.
Well, Jim had seen some of my drawings, and he actually seeked me out. He wanted to get started in designing corrals, and he really helped me get my business started. He was one of the really important mentors out in the industry. I mean, he was a man that really helped me a whole lot. He built my projects, but I also helped him. Now he's doing big, gigantic projects now for the Department of Transportation in Arizona and military bases and all sorts of things. But he was just a little tiny company in a little teeny small office in his house when he started. So we both helped each other.
Well, but you've helped a lot of people, and I love that it's one of the things, Anita, that you featured in the book. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you were impressed with, Anita, ways that Temple has helped others.
Well, one of the things that I found out at Temple's birthday party was when I learned that Temple pays for her graduate students full entire tuition and enables them to get their PhD in the animal science under her, instruction and tutelage. And I was so shocked at that. There's so many people that I've known in my lifetime, or you read about, that are, have the means to do that, and they would never do anything like that. I was just so, Temple wants to continue on this whole, the animal handling and everything, the way she teaches it, and wants it to continue on, and that's what's it's so spectacular. When that was very shocking, very thrilling thing for me to hear that when I learned that.
Yeah, Temple, was this a secret? Because I don't think anybody knew this.
No, it's not secret. I'm just not the kind of person to flaunt stuff.
Because you're so spectacular. But you've helped other people along the way.
I've put a lot of students through graduate school.
Amazing. And when I was saying earlier that my favorite part of the book was hearing about your friend Mark, and obviously you did a lot of things to help him along his way.
Well, let me tell you, the way I got involved with Mark, Mark was a farrier, a horseshoer. He came to me in the early 90s, and he had a theory about the temperament of horses and the hair whorls that are in the middle of horses' heads. And he had observed during horseshoeing that a horse that had high hair whorls, way up high on the forehead, maybe a set of double hair whorls, a lot more flighty. And he had gone to several universities, and they had just turned him down. They thought that was crazy. He came to me, and I said, well, let's work on this, but instead of horses, let's do cattle. They have exactly the same kind of hair whorls. So we did a study. We went out to a feed yard and looked at 1,500 head of cattle, and we ranked them on how much they got agitated in the squeeze chute. And the animals that tended to get agitated when they're held in the squeeze chute had higher hair whorls. And also at that same time, we were doing some of the early first work on cattle temperament. Now, I had a student named Bridget Blazonnet, and Bridget did a study where we found that cattle that are really wild and get agitated when you handle them had lower weight gains. And 20 years ago, that was real radical stuff. Now, everybody's temperament testing cattle. It's not industry practice, but in 1996 and 97, paper was published. That was the real pioneering stuff.
Well, and I found it fascinating that you go on to talk about this study in the book. Anita had included it in the book because it's fascinating. And that one of the things that you both discovered was that if you treated those cattle and those horses slightly differently, that they were better performers.
That's right. See, what you have to do with a horse that's really flighty is you got to make sure you don't traumatize them. You take a horse like an Arab that's very sensitive. If you beat it up, that animal almost, I think, gets a PTSD and it doesn't get over it. You can take an animal that's got a calmer temperament, force it to do something, get away with it. But you take that animal that's a really sensitive, high fear temperament, and you treat it right. Some of those are some of the most intelligent horses.
Yes.
Well, and of course, that seemed very familiar to me with the autism community, that maybe a different way of learning, a different approach, but sometimes the intelligence is so much higher. Don't you both agree?
I've talked about autism. I've always said it. Autism in the mild forms is just part of normal human variation. A brain can be more thinking, or a brain can be more social, emotional, and there's a certain range that's just going to be, normal variation. And I found a really interesting paper that came out in 2018, where scientists have been looking at genes involved with autism, and they're all brain development genes. And basically, what scientists are learning is that the genes that cause autism and schizophrenia are the same genes that give human beings a very large brain, and that autism is rapid early growth, too much, and schizophrenia is not enough later growth, and it involves the same things. In fact, I recently did some real fancy genomics testing, and I found out exactly why I have a genetic defect, why I have small teeth, I've got thin nails that break off, my skin's a mess. But it actually told me very, very little about the autism genes. There's a whole list of them, and each one contributes a little bit. And that's exactly how brain development genes would work.
It's all so fascinating. I want to encourage people, they need to get this book. I just think it's a lovely book. Obviously you've read the book now, right, Temple?
Oh, absolutely. I got a lot of my NASA pictures in there. I did a fabulous trip to NASA. I got to see a SpaceX launch. I got to sit in the launch director's chair where they did the moon shot. It was a total NASA geek out. Got lots of pictures of me at NASA in the book, in stories I tell my friends. That was so much fun. The thing I learned when I went to NASA, and I've been to NASA also in Houston. And
I was with you on that trip.
Lab, the right stuff rolls the rockets, but the geeks and the nerds and the misfits and the people with mild autism and dyslexia and every other label, they built the stuff.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. And I wished I thought of it because I have a bunch more pictures of you when we went to Houston together to NASA Temple that I wished I'd given them to Anita because I've got a bunch of pictures, but I'll share those with you, Temple.
Well, we got some really good pictures that
They
we
are, they're
took at
wonderful.
Cape Kennedy, and took a lot of, going to a real launch is so exciting compared to watching it on TV. We got to get kids out doing real things.
I agree.
Yes.
Now you're breaking up just a little bit, Temple, and
Okay,
I wanted.
and I've got another book coming out called Calling All Minds. It's about famous inventors and all the things that I made when I was a child, and I'd spent hours and hours tinkering and making things.
I love that. I want to take just a second here because we've had a bunch of people writing in questions. Somebody wrote in and said 2 questions for Temple about how to learn to work and get a job and how to learn to drive a car.
All right, I definitely want to talk about how to learn work and how to drive. I can answer those really easily. You want me to just do that right now?
Yes, please.
Okay, driving. It's going to take longer. In order to deal with the problem of the multitasking, the person with autism has to learn the operation of the car before we do any traffic. Driver's ed throws them in way too quickly. I learned to drive on my aunt's ranch where it was 3 miles up to the mailbox, 3 miles back, and by the time I did that all summer, I had done 200 miles of driving. Then we did traffic. So what I recommend is spend 20 minutes a day in a completely safe place, like a giant parking lot, back roads, learning how to operate the car before we do any traffic at all, maybe even before you do driver's ed, because they throw them in way too quickly. That's my main thing on driving. It's going to take longer, and then I'm learning how to work. The kids that are coming of age now, when they're in middle school, they need to be doing volunteer jobs. It's really important to start doing jobs outside the home on a schedule. Now, in some states, you can do regular jobs at 14, others at 16. Let's get 2 real jobs under that belt before they graduate. I would like to get rid of the problems with the transition. I'd like the transition to work done. Because when you look at a lot of older people, I have grandfathers coming up to me all the time, and they're finding out that they're on the spectrum when their grandkid is diagnosed. And granddad had a job all his life because he had a paper route at age 11, and he'd been working the whole time he was in high school.
And I think Joanne would absolutely agree. And so I want to move on to another question here. They want to know what's the best advice for caregivers who have newly diagnosed toddlers in regards to helping with relating and educating their children.
Well, we've got to make sure we start doing some early intervention. And when I was 2 years old and a toddler, my speech teacher did a lot of work on learning how to wait and take turns. Do not wait 2 years for a diagnosis. You've already got a diagnosis. He's not talking, and his behavior's not very social and has problems. Teach these kids how to take turns, playing little turn-taking games, board games, maybe with a ball, throwing it back and forth. My speech teacher would speak very slowly to me, start teaching me words, but you've got to start working with this kid now. And the book I'd recommend, my books for that, is The Way I See It. And I'd recommend getting the book now, and you start working on this kid now. If you get services right away, wonderful. But if you're in a part of the country where services are not available, then you need to get some volunteers from your church group, because the worst thing you can do with a 2-year-old that's not talking is to do nothing. That is the worst. Earlier we work on these kids, the better.
Wonderful. Another person says, Dr. Grandin, any advice for communication and socialization for my 20-year-old autistic son who is verbal but only expresses his needs and wants? And they said, thank you.
Well, the thing about an autistic person is you've got to get out and experience things, because you learn things by comparing it back to previous experience. And when I first did public speaking, I was scared, and I walked out of a class where I was doing public speaking. And you've got to get out and do things. Some of the things that helped me was being party hostess when I was 8 and 9 years old. I had to shake hands with the guests. They've got to get them out doing things. And I had friends who shared interests. For me and for you, Anita, it was horses was one of the big things. Also, I had model rockets as one of my shared interests, and electronics lab. Doing friends who shared interests. Because when I was in high school and I was bullied and teased, those were the places that were refuges away from bullying and teasing. And give the kids some choices. Okay, you could do karate, or you could do robotics, or you could do robotics, or you could do band. Give them some choices. But you basically just got to get them out doing things.
I love that. And it kind of feeds into this next question. Ari says, I have Asperger's and I love wolves and wildlife biology. Is this unhealthy? I think that it's okay. I have a healthy lifestyle and I go outside a lot, but people tell me it's not good.
No, wildlife biology? You can have a career in wildlife biology. There's a lot of people that work in wildlife biology. Might be something you might want to major in college. And what I want to emphasize in college today, do internships. They lead to jobs. So if you go into a wildlife biology department, we have one right here on the CSU campus. You need to be doing an internship every summer in wildlife biology. No, wildlife biology is a career choice that's totally doable.
I agree. Andrew.
And Shannon, I just want to point out,
yes,
everything that you're talking about, the driving, the internship, everything, and jobs, this is all addressed in this book. Also, the stories I tell my friends in Temple's Big Message, and there's a chapter in there we talk about the driving and how Temple learned how to drive. So yes, all these things that we're touching on right now are also covered in this book.
I thank you for pointing that out, and I appreciate that. There's one more question. Andrew wants to know, hi, Dr. Grandin. This is Andrew. I've got a question for you. I'm on the spectrum. Do you think having sensory issues counts as outbursts?
Well, sensory issues are a real issue. I mean, I had problems with sound sensitivity, and one of the ways to help reduce sound sensitivity is you have control over it. Like there was one boy who was afraid of the vacuum cleaner, and when they let him play with it, where you could turn it on and off and control it, he finally got to where he could tolerate it better. There's a paper you might want to get. It's called Environmental Enrichment is an Effective Treatment for Autism. You need to type these 3 words into Google. Autism, environmental enrichment. And what you do in this paper is you stimulate 2 different senses at the same time, and you constantly vary the 2 senses that you stimulate. Now, I want to tell you an interesting thing on sensory about astronauts. There was the astronaut that spent a year on the space station, and when he got back, he had sensory sensitivity of his skin, with his clothes rubbing on his skin, really similar to someone with autism. Now, he didn't say autism, but what he described in an interview, he said it was a burning sensation. You see, and that's because his skin had no input, like his clothes didn't hardly touch him when he was in weightlessness of space. And it went away after a couple of months when he got back home. When he got back home, he jumped into the pool with his clothes on. He had sensory issues, but they were caused by a lack of tactile sensory input while he was in the space station in weightlessness.
It's fascinating.
So I think sensory issues for me is the number one top thing that needs to be researched in autism. Big number one area that needs to be researched is treatments for sensory problems. They range from being a nuisance to being very debilitating.
Well, and Anita, you can chime in and talk about sensory issues too, because you have sensory issues.
Yes.
And it's part of what has led to you being discriminated against in your job. Don't you agree?
Yes, of course, the loud heavy metal music, yes, being played in the operating room. Yes.
But you are completely able to do your job at the top of your game, and if people were just respectful, these sensory issues wouldn't prevent you from doing your job.
Right, I mean, it doesn't prevent me from doing my job, it just physically makes me ill, so by the time I leave at the end of the day, I have a raging headache and feel sick all over and totally exhausted because that kind of massive sensory overload for 12 hours just really wears a person down.
Absolutely.
But I still do my job, but I'm the one who has to suffer for that.
And it's very tiring.
Exactly.
You see, I still have problems with, if I'm in a noisy restaurant, I can tolerate it, but the problem is I'm basically functionally deaf. I can't screen out the restaurant background noise. If I want to have serious conversations with people in the restaurant, I'd prefer a quieter one.
Absolutely. We had one more comment from Maya who says, Dr. Grandin, this is Maya, who emailed you the other day about Stephen Hawking. And she goes on to say it looks like that she won't be able to see you in Athens, but she's wanting to know if you have anything planned in Atlanta anytime soon.
Well, I have to look at the schedule. I think I got the blessing of going to Atlanta, but I have to look at the schedule. as of remembering right now, in the close future, I don't remember anything in Atlanta coming up right away.
Had you ever had the opportunity to meet Stephen Hawking?
No, I never met Stephen Hawking. After he died, I looked up a whole lot of things about him, and there were some very interesting things that Stephen Hawking said. One of the things he said is since he couldn't move, this was in The Economist really recently, couldn't move and couldn't write, he had to use geometry to do all his mathematics in 10. I thought was really interesting, and he used Penrose mathematics. I actually looked some of it up online, and it's pure pattern thinking.
Fascinating gentleman. And Maya further went on to say, Temple, I'm discovering a childhood obsession, which is from Roger Rabbit, the movie, and I want to start a collection. And she says, what are some other ways to work with this obsession? Because she's thinking of starting a collection, but what's another way she could work with that obsession?
Well, if you're good at drawing, you could go into animation. Is one of the things that you could do. It kind of depends. If you wanted to teach, you could teach filmmaking to kids, teach kids animation. Now, when I was a young kid, all I wanted to draw was horse heads. And my mother always encouraged me to draw lots of different things. Take that obsession and broaden it out. Learn about how the Roger Rabbit movies were made. That was one of the very first movies where you had animation and live people action together in the same scene. That was something that was a very new thing when that movie came out.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I know that we need to let you go. We've reached the time that because you've got a lot of things going on at school today. And but I want to thank you, Temple, for all that you do. I want to thank you for taking the time today and for all those hours with Anita. We're going to keep Anita with us as we move to the next segment. But I want to encourage people to get the book. The book is fabulous. It's Dr. Temple Grandin, the stories.
I can stay a few more minutes.
Oh, okay.
Unless you want to just go on to the next segment.
Well,
I need to leave at quarter to the hour to get to my class.
Well, we'll keep you as long as we can keep you, Temple.
I can stay on a little bit longer, but I just need to leave
to the global.
at quarter to 1 my time to walk over to the 1 o'clock
Okay.
class.
Joanne has something that she wants to pose.
I thought it would
Okay.
be interesting, Temple, to speak to the mission for the UN today for autism awareness is women and children. And as we know globally, that doesn't look the same as it looks here. Women are discriminated against educationally, employment-wise, and also there's more violence with women with autism globally. And you travel globally as well. Would you like to speak to that?
Well, I believe that's somebody else to speak about. I'm not doing any global traveling right now.
Okay.
Well, I've got some cattle stuff I'm working on.
But obviously, these are important issues.
No, they're important issues, and
Yeah.
they're absolutely important issues. But the problem is, I can only work on so many issues.
Absolutely,
And the other
absolutely.
thing is, I am a professor of animal science at Colorado State in the animal science department, but I think it's also important that I still continue to do my actual real career.
Yes.
Autism is a very important part of my life, but it's not my only life. And I had another big thing I thought about when I went to Cape Kennedy. I had a chance to visit the Mars launch platform. And there were some people working on that had Tourette's. And as I walked under the American flag saying, where it said the future starts here, I thought, what would you rather be, Mr. Tourette's or Mr. Mars launch platform? I think I'd rather be Mr. Launchpad. And autism is an extremely important part of who I am. But my career is one of my main identities. And in reading some materials about Stephen Hawking last night, he talked about the importance of career. Now, he was also very active as an activist, especially later in his life.
Absolutely.
My career was what gave Stephen Hawking's life meaning.
Yeah, we're losing you a little bit, but I noticed that one of the things that you talked about in the book that you feel really good about is that when you started out in your career, you were one woman with all those other men, but that you have actually helped other women have a career in the same field. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, somebody has to be the pioneer, and being a woman was a much bigger issue for me than the autism was, the being a woman. And one of the things is I was rather kind of forceful, and I would sort of push my way into things. There's a scene in the HBO movie where I walk up to the editor of the Farmer Ranchman magazine and I get his card. That scene actually happened.
Yeah.
And I recognized that if I could start writing articles for the Farm magazine, that would open up a lot of doors. I had to have the guts to walk up and get that card. And the movie showed it really well.
And I think that's one of the things that you and Anita have in common is that both of you are, it seems to me, neither one of you will take no for an answer. Anita, do you want to speak to?
Anita, you were going to drive that Zamboni no matter what. And you ended up getting to run the searchlights and drive the Zamboni.
That's right.
I can relate to that.
Yes, exactly.
And these are just some of the things, you guys, that they talk about in the book. I love picturing you driving a Zamboni, Anita, and I agree with Dr. Grandin. There's no way that was not going to happen. But you both have had to push and push and push, and hear the word no, and then find another way in.
Well, one of the things that motivated me to, I've written one column for the Farmer Ranchman, basically on my master's thesis that I did on squeeze chutes. And then after I got kicked out of the Scottsdale feed yard, and they actually did put bull testicles on my vehicle, I then went back to the Farmer Ranchman and suggested that I write a column. So that was my revenge for getting thrown out of Scottsdale feed yard, was to write for the magazine and get a press pass. And I recognized the value of that press pass because it got me into meetings with very expensive registration fees for free.
And where do you think the both of you learned this kind of tenacity? Did you get it from the other women in your lives?
Well, my mother was a bit of a rebel, and she had a lot of tenacity. My grandfather was the co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes. We used to talk about science all the time, and the other thing that helped me was being that party hostess when I was really little. I learned how to walk up to strange people and just shake hands with them and talk to them.
I love it. Anita, where do you think you got your tenacity?
It's just something that kind of evolved along the way. Being that I came from a poor family, and everything that I wanted to do, I had to really just work really hard and fight for it. And just, I wasn't about to take no for an answer for anything, and just would forge ahead. And if I couldn't get in one way, I just figure out another way. Just like Temple with that find your way in the back door. That's how it had to work for me. And like, that's the only way. If you want to really do something, you just have to keep on going.
Yeah.
You see, my revenge for getting kicked out of Scottsdale feed yard was to become a columnist. And then I remember when I went to cover my first Arizona cattle feeders meeting, they wanted to throw me out. And then I proved to them that when I covered the Arizona cattle feeders meeting, I did it accurately. And I didn't misquote anybody. And I got a reputation as a very good reporter who always quoted everybody accurately. And then people began to respect that. Then the other thing I did to sell jobs is I pull my drawings out and show them to people. And they look at my drawings and go, oh, you may be weird, you drew that? I'd show them pictures of jobs I had designed. Again, selling my work rather than selling myself. I'd go in to interview a client, I just laid the drawings out on the table.
Well, and you talk in the book about how the difference between a man and a woman going for a job. And that a man can be at 60%. What percent does a woman have to be at to do the same job?
Some of it came out of Carol Sandburg's lead in. A lot of women are too chicken to take a job unless they're at the 90%. Most guys will take a job at the 60%. When I took that dip vat job, I was at the 60% level. And I said, give me 3 weeks, because this is pre-internet. So I had to get drawings on how to do these concrete reinforcement stuff. And I got on the phone the next day and I got the drawings. I went all over Arizona looking at different dip vats. But I've also seen a guy, when working professionally, who was at the 20% level, and he had such a big ego that he didn't bother to learn, and he wrecked a meatpacking plant. Wrecked it. It had to close. I was actually on that project. I was just horrified.
And he got to keep his job, is that correct?
Well, he actually ended up eventually switching to another very good job after he basically didn't put enough wastewater treatment into a meatpacking plant, and they were told by all the other engineers that he didn't have enough wastewater treatment. He went ahead with it anyway, and the city shut him down.
Yeah, and if a woman had done that, I think the outcome might have been different.
It would have been the end of a woman's career.
Yes.
If a woman had done that. I watched another plant. I was on another project where a guy wrecked a refrigeration system. because he didn't listen to anybody.
Wow. Well,
And this was just, I call them the plant wreckers. It's just pure ego. Now, I was at the 60% level, but I scrambled and very quickly got myself up to the 90% level. I went to every dip vat in Arizona, and I got the drawings that show how to do the concrete reinforcement, because I knew somebody in Washington, D.C. to call that worked for the USDA, and he sent me a book that had the drawings. And I got a hold of other places to get other information. That's why I said give me 3 weeks, because I knew I had to get information together to do that project.
Well, it's always fascinating to hear the tales that you tell, which is one of the reasons why people should get this book, because you're going to hear things that you've never heard anyplace else, and it's just delightful. And not only that, you'll get to know Anita Lesko. So we want to encourage people. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it from all the major booksellers, and you can get it at Future Horizons. They have a great website where you can get all of Temple's books there. We want to thank Future Horizons for all that they do. Temple, I know you got to get over to your class, and we got to get on to our next segment, but it is always a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm going to run off to class, and I hope I didn't fade in and out too much.
Not too much at all.